All right, peace, everybody. So this is a video I'm going to make in response to some people who think that Christ broke the law of the Sabbath. Therefore, we don't no longer need to observe the Sabbath. But that's not true. He didn't break any law. And I want to make a distinction between the law of Moses and what we know as Judaism, because there is a distinction. And we're going to kind of make it plain. So this is Mark chapter 3, verse 1 through 6. And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand, and they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said unto him, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life or kill. But they held their peace. And when he had looked around about on them with anger, but grieved a hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored, whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. So, first question I had, can y'all find any verse in the Old Testament that says that it's unlawful to heal somebody on the Sabbath? You can't, because it's not in there. All right, now let's go to Mark chapter 7. And it's 1 through 8. So, then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain scribes which came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of the disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands off, eat not, holding the traditions of the elders. So the tradition of the elders is that they have to wash their hands before they eat food. Verse 4, and when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not, and many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups, pots, brazen vessels, and of tables. And then that's what I will talk about that in Colossians. And then verse 5, then the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why walk not thy disciples according to the traditions of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? And he answered unto them, saying, what has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching the doctrines, the commandments of men, for laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such like these you do. So that's another thing. Do y'all know any law in the Old Testament where it says you have to wash your cups before you eat, or you have to wash your hands before you eat? That's not in the law of Moses. Okay, now let's do it one more. Let's go back to Mark chapter 2, and let's go to verse 23. And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, have you never heard what David did when he had need and was an hungered, they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priest, and gave also to them which was with him. And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Okay, so these are the scriptures I want to point out. So all this stuff that the Pharisees are pointing out of Christ, they saying that he's breaking laws and doing all this, but he's not breaking the law of Moses. He's breaking their laws. Okay, now I want to show y'all what is the difference between the Torah or the first 5 books of the Bible and what the Pharisees consider as law.
Judaism is pretty focused on what you do from day to day. Not just when and how to pray, but how to eat, raise kids, farm, cut your fingernails. If you want to learn how to live in a Jewish way, you can watch all our videos, but eventually you're going to want to dive into Jewish law, or halakha. Some people say halacha, some people say halakha, which means the path or the way. Here's an overview. It starts with the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible includes the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. For short, you can call the Hebrew Bible Tanakh, which stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. If you're Jewish, saying Tanakh beats the pants off saying Old Testament. which is a Christian term used in contrast to the New Testament. When the Hebrew Bible was being codified, there was debate over which books to include in the canon. And there's a whole list of books called the Apocrypha that didn't quite make the cut. Some of these books are actually in the Christian Bible, the Book of Maccabees, for instance. And there's other books called the Pseudepigrapha that didn't make it into anyone's Bible. Inside the Hebrew Bible, there are lots of laws and stories that later generations weren't sure how to interpret. For example, the Torah says not to work on the Sabbath, but what does that mean? What's work? Does it apply to office jobs or just manual labor? Does it include working out? So along come 6 relatively short books called the Mishnah, which try to explain it in a style that's pretty straightforward and sparse. The Mishnah gives a list of 39 things not to do on Shabbat, like baking, sewing, building, etc. It doesn't really explain why those 39 activities are forbidden, it just gives the list. And then, just as the Mishnah tries to explain the Torah, there's another set of books that attempt to explain the Mishnah. This is called the Gemara, and it's massive. 63 tractates, or sections. The Gemara elaborates on the Mishnah by going into a long conversation. So the Mishnah says simply, you can't thresh on Shabbat. Great, no problem, you say. But the rabbis in the Gemara took on, what does that mean for us today? And they extrapolated, well, you can't just avoid threshing grain. The act of removing a seed kernel from its tough outer layer is a lot like shucking corn, so let's not do that either. You also can't wring out a washcloth or squeeze lemon into your tea. Extrapolation. Together, the Mishnah and Gemara are called the Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds, the Babylonian, or the Bavli, and the Jerusalem edition, or the Yerushalmi. Same basic idea, but they were put together in 2 different locations, so they have some really interesting variations. The Talmud is so large that yet another set of texts came along to simplify and codify it, the Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. And yet, if you spent years making your way through all those texts, you still wouldn't know everything Jewish, like, say, whether escalators are allowed on Shabbat. So along comes modern Jewish case law. People send questions about specific situations to an expert and receive written answers called responsa. You can look up responsa online, and they cover everything from immunization to gambling to escalators. The written Torah is considered sacred, obviously, and Jews view all the texts that came after as sacred also. They are known as oral Torah. Jewish law is not frozen in time. It's continuing to unfold today. Local communities are empowered to study and interpret halakha. This varies a lot in different branches of Judaism today. In some communities, all the texts that we've discussed are considered binding. And if there's a question about them, you go to your local rabbi, whose decisions are binding. In other communities, people are individually free to study and make their own decisions about halakha. These really different approaches to understanding and observing Jewish law are one of the main differences behind different Jewish movements. For more about the various Jewish movements, watch the next video in the Judaism 101 series, and subscribe to Bim Bam to get more Judaism 101 videos as they come out.
Deuteronomy 12:32. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto nor diminish from it. See, that was the thing. That was the problem with what the Pharisees were doing. They were adding to the law. And that's what Christ was doing to them. He was going back to the law and saying, like, y'all disobeying the commandments by adding your traditions. And that's what Judaism has done over time. And that's what the Pharisees were. Their oral law eventually was written down in the Middle Ages. And that's what they created the Talmud, what she mentioned in the video. So that's what they were that's what they were doing in the New Testament when the Pharisees were around. After they left Babylon, the Babylonian captivity, they started making these oral laws to prevent people to try to keep them from not sin on the Sabbath or not commit any sins. So they would add laws to it to try to make them obey the commandments. So they did it with a good intent, but it was putting such a heavy burden on the people that that's why when Christ came on the scene, he was like, my burden is light, my yoke is not heavy, my burden is light. So that's why they were getting on, because he was taking people away from the philosophy that the Pharisees created. And as the Pharisees eventually, once their oral laws became written down, called the Talmud, it became Rabbinic Judaism, and that's what a lot of Jewish people they follow today. And that's why in Colossians chapter 2, right here, where it says, therefore, chapter 2, verse 20, wherefore, if you've been dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why as through living in the world are you subject to ordinances, touch not, taste not, handle not, which are all to perish with the using after commandments and doctrines of men. That's what Christ was going for. He said, y'all, that's what Paul wrote his letters about. He's like, y'all are free from these traditions of men, so why are you trying to go back to them? He's not saying anything against the law of Moses. He's talking about the Pharisees' oral law. And that's why when you go to Galatians chapter 1, he says right here, verse 13, he said, for you have heard of my conversion in time past in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it. And when you look up in the definition of the Greek of this word, Jews' religion, that means Judaism. That's what Judaism come from. And 14, profited the Jews' religion above many my equals in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. So that's what he was talking. That's what the whole Galatians letter is about. He's trying to tell these people, y'all don't have to go back to these oral laws. That's why he's like, because it was tied in with circumcision. If you do circumcision, that means you got to do all these other stuff in order to be, quote unquote, accepted by God. That's why he was like, you don't have to do that. He said that's why he went so hard on people of Galatia, because he was trying to warn them, because he used to be zealous for the traditions of his father. He was Paul was a Pharisee. So now he's saying that you don't have to do that no more because you got Christ. And now you can go and just do what he intended you to do from the beginning, which is just follow his commandments. You don't have to add anything to it. So that's it. I think that's it. That's all I had to say. But yeah, so it's basically saying that Christ didn't break any law. The law still abound. It's just a lot of these people think that when you do the Old Testament stuff or the Torah, like the feast days, like Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles and stuff like that, they think that you're being Jewish. No, it's a difference between the Jewish law, that which follows the Talmud, or why I say Rabbinic Judaism, because there are some Jewish people who don't follow the Talmud. I think it's like the Karaite Jewish people. But for the most part, Rabbinic Judaism is the most popular, and that's what the ones they regard the Talmud as, just as high as authority of the Bible or the scriptures. Or sometimes they think the Talmud is even greater than the scriptures. And that's what Christ was trying to warn you about. So that's why I just want to say, man. All right. Hopefully somebody got edified by this. Peace.